It's been about a week since we last checked in on Sony's drive to end physical media by 2028. And one of the givens when it comes to this situation is that a week feels like an eternity. That's because on a daily, if not hourly basis, we the gamers are hit with a constant barrage of news and tweets and games company CEOs giving interviews, all telling us that basically it's over and that physical media is dead, while also seeing the proverbial goalpost moved inch by inch as these companies push to destroy what's left of our rights of ownership. First, it was digital download codes being yanked from outside retailers. Then, purchased content was pulled from libraries due to licensing issues. Then we saw 14-day DRM, variable rate pricing, paid access to the storefronts on streaming sites like Crunchyroll, to now 6-hour exclusivity for a world premiere of GTA 6 locked behind a Netflix paywall. We've even seen 𝐓𝐡𝐮𝐦𝐢𝐥, Take-Two's CEO, say the quiet part out loud when he said that cloud gaming will be the next thing, and it's going to be here in 3 years, because if the situation isn't crazy enough right now, imagine a future where you own nothing, including the platform that plays your games. Sony knew that what they were doing would be hit with a massive wave of backlash due to just how unpopular their decision was, issuing company-wide gag orders, even prompting sites like Forbes to label this Sony's biggest scandal in 20 years. And you know, we've seen Sony pull off some real bangers over the past 20 to 30 years, but I would agree, this really is their biggest scandal. Now, if there was any doubt that the Sony of old that gamers flocked to during the PS4 era was dead, all you have to do is take a 30-second scroll through any Sony PlayStation post on Twitter or their YouTube comment sections, because it's a mess. I mean, there's no other way to describe it. What Sony has done has created chaos on a scale we have never seen from the games industry. And along the way, we knew there were some companies who were, so to speak, waiting in the wings for Sony's decision, like Ubisoft, who saw what Sony had done and immediately hitched their wagon up to that gravy train of an all-digital and therefore more profitable future. Now, when it comes down to it, this push by Big Corpo boils down to two things: profits and control. You see, no competition from outside retailers like Amazon and Walmart means that Sony can, for instance, charge $69.99 or $79.99 for a game, while you could have found that for half that price outside of their storefront. No physical discs means the death of the secondhand market, which may eventually lead to Sony getting shelled in court from lawsuits and petitions coming in from Mexico, Brazil, the UK, the US, and the Netherlands. And by the way, more on that last one in just a moment. But outside of the profits, this is actually fundamentally a battle for control. Sony wants it, and I mean all of it, so they can take away or restrict access to goods you've purchased, such as when they just deleted 551 movies and TV shows on PlayStation, which were bought and paid for by customers with real money, only to see them denied access to those goods when Sony announced that they couldn't reach a licensing agreement with Studio Canal. And so not only did people lose access to that streaming media they had paid full price for, but they also did not receive any sort of refund from Sony for those purchases. Imagine going out to your driveway, you hop into your car, you push the ignition button, and absolutely nothing happens. Then when you call up the local dealership where you bought the car from a few years back, they tell you that the manufacturer of your car couldn't reach an agreement with the company that made the engine. So that engine will no longer work, like at all. Oh, and by the way, there is no refund available and no way to get your engine back online so you can enjoy the car you paid good money for. Well, that's the future that Sony wants. A future where access can be revoked at any time and where TOS, or terms of service, only exists to be broken, and gamers are treated like living, breathing cash registers that exist for one purpose and one purpose only: to be milked. Now, it seems that these corporations are prepared to do whatever is necessary to get what they want as they roll out industry insiders, experts, and ex-heads of corporate departments to run what can only be described as interference for the likes of Sony and the rest of these corporations. Essentially delivering analyst coverage and knowledge about the future of gaming and how this is going to end with Sony and control. Basically, anyone that wants to fight for games preservation is going to lose type messaging, that sort of thing. With games media a willing participant in delivering that news, but never disclosing who and what these analysts represent. Or in the case of some of these ex-executives, I truly believe they have no idea what's actually going on, which is ultimately very dangerous because the things they are saying and being printed in these articles is far from the truth. Buckle up, because here comes a couple of examples of what these insiders and former executives are saying, and both of these are simply, well, I don't know how else to describe them except for mind-blowing. Now, the first one of these comes to us from Games Radar, titled, "Sony killing PlayStation disc will make PS Store prices cheaper," former Square Enix financial exec says, and only need to look at Steam to understand why. Square Enix, Ubisoft, EA, and other publishers will be competing more directly. This article goes on to say there are many, many downsides to Sony ending physical disc production in 2028. However, one small silver lining, according to a former higher-up at Square Enix, is that games will get cheaper. I'm sorry, but what? Normally, I would take you through this article for at least, a few more statements or paragraphs, but to anyone out there thinking that once Sony kills off physical media, they get rid of competing outside retailers and just nuke the secondhand market, that's somehow going to make games cheaper, is living in an alternate reality where up is down and where scummy business practices are actually pro-consumer. But, Jacob Navok, former director of business development at Square Enix, had even more to say here. Competition between publishers is what drives pricing pressure, not competition between digital stores, he says. This is because publishers set pricing on digital stores. His stance, then, is that Sony going fully digital through the PS Store adds another layer because it'll force publishers to be more wary of their libraries and each other. Quote, "The more the PlayStation Store becomes digital only, the greater this trend will accelerate," Navok observes. "You will see more sales and dynamic pricing similar to Steam because publishers will compete among themselves to a greater extent." This notion that exists that competition good, no competition bad, is one that we as fans, gamers, and consumers have enjoyed and will continue to enjoy up until 2028. But after that, all bets are off when Sony does shut down every competitor it has and funnels everyone to its singular storefront. There will be no competition, and when there is no competition, what do you think the PlayStation Store will do with its pricing? If games right now on the PS Store that are already 3, 4, or 5 years old are still priced at full price, with competition existing and better prices found outside of the PS Store, what do you think is going to happen when all those competitors are removed? This will be the very opposite of what this ex-Square Enix executive thinks it will be. To say that the PS Store will somehow magically start running more sales and dynamic pricing similar to Steam because publishers will be forced to compete amongst themselves is insane. We also know that this notion of publishers somehow getting into competition battles for prices on the PlayStation Store is simply not true. As once Sony PlayStation was deposed and forced to tell the truth under oath in the case of 𝐓𝐡𝐮𝐲 versus Sony Interactive Entertainment LLC, filed a few years back in California, we know from that statement that in 2019, Sony not only eliminated retailers' ability to sell downloads for PlayStation games, but, listen to this part, Sony also disclosed that they require publishers who sell digital games on the PlayStation Store to relinquish full control over the retail prices. Going on to say, as a result, the policy swiftly and effectively foreclosed on any and all price competition in the retail market for digital PlayStation games. So to come out and drop these public statements about how going all digital will somehow make games on the PlayStation Store cheaper because you'll have publishers competing for prices with dynamic pricing and sales, while Sony has already stated under oath that it is they who set the prices on the digital storefront. I mean, This statement from this ex-Square Enix executive is not only false, it's also completely dancing around the fact that Sony has already said the quiet part out loud. It is them and not the publishers who set the storefront prices, and this is why gamers are so concerned over Sony getting full control over the levers of power, and what that will mean for not only the price of games, but the rights of ownership and access to those purchases. The fact that this executive apparently doesn't know how Sony demands full control of pricing on their storefront, or has chosen to ignore that point, while making statements citing specifically Sony and their storefront, is at the least misinforming the public, but at the worst, actively lying to gamers on behalf of Big Corpo. Also at fault is the news publication itself for publishing the statements without the counterbalance and or research of Sony's statements under oath about how it is they, not the publishers, who control pricing on the PlayStation Store. I wish the madness ended here, but it doesn't stop, as we've got another article published by Games Radar, and this one will simply make your head spin. Quote, "Stop killing games might never win, according to expert. Are consumer rights being violated? Well, they already exist to be violated." And like I said, yeah, this one starts off crazy, and just wait for the ending. The Stop Killing Games movement, inspired by Ubisoft's shruggy shutdown of 2014 Racer the Crew, has hit a few potholes since its 2024 inception, including a bunch of European publishers' loud opposition towards it, because of course they would, and the EU itself ruling against its plea for better consumer protection against live service game death. Proponents should also prepare for their humble campaign taking a full-on trip off a cliff, suggest Flux Digital Policy video games policy experts Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿𝐲 since what it wants might be a legal impossibility. Listen to this next part though. Quote, "Are consumer rights being violated? Well, they already exist to be violated." She says things like terms of service already provide a framework for how publishers and consumers should respond to scenarios of sudden live service death, and it's unlikely that Stop Killing Games campaigners will be able to squeeze anything else out of the many legal, technological, and video games industry standards working against them. Quote, "I understand people's passions behind it," Ponton says about Stop Killing Games, and that they want to continue playing a game that they have particularly loved or enjoyed and invested time in. I would also add in there, and bought and paid for. And I can see exactly why this is important to an awful lot of people. But it takes more than conviction to overturn the many reasons IP holders are allowed to end access to a game you paid for, but they really own. Game over, right? I mean, not only should we just stop now and be happy with what few rights of ownership we have, but the TOS are not there to protect us. Those are there for the publishers, and those terms also exist to be broken if it benefits them, which is why the Stop Killing Games movement is so damn important. That dystopian future is right around the corner for us gamers, where these big corpos take control of everything, and they own everything down to the streaming devices, and you should just be quiet and content with what little they give you. However, here's what Games Radar did not tell you about Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿𝐲, and much like with their first article with the ex-Square Enix executive not citing the Sony lawsuit completely dissolving his arguments, here again we see a news site not taking the time to do their due diligence. You see, as tweeted from Pirate Nation on Twitter, Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐻𝐿𝐲 says Stop Killing Games' idea of creating laws to protect players is complicated. But there's some important context. Ponton is Director of Public Policy and Public Affairs at Flux Digital Policy, a games industry policy consultancy that is part of Wigan. Wigan's clients include, listen to this, major companies such as Sony and Warner Bros. Discovery. Flux also works on helping games companies understand and respond to changes in regulation and policy. So, if you're casually surfing the web and run across both of these Games Radar articles, those headlines might stick with you and, let's say, influence your desire to not push back against what Sony and these other publishers are doing, because, as these headlines suggest, what Sony is doing is actually good for the games market. And besides, it's already over. But the context is what's missing here. Who do or did these experts work for, and who do they currently represent? We even saw this pop up days after Sony's all-digital announcement came out, when news publications ran an article about Dr. 𝐓𝐡𝐮𝐦𝐢𝐥, CEO of analyst firm 𝐓𝐡𝐮𝐬𝐢𝐥, who said this shift to all-digital just made sense. But here again, what was missing is that 𝐓𝐡𝐮𝐬𝐢𝐥, among its many functions, advised investors who, among their investments, was the broader gaming market, including groups that make these games. At times like these, if statements are going to be made and published, like the ones we just saw, a little fair and balanced research into who is saying these things and who they represent would be in order. But it seems that games media is more than happy to share and print these stories that not only present one side, it's the Sony side that they're presenting to its viewers. Now, luckily, we did receive a shot of good news in that recently Stop Killing Games has actually joined the Dutch consumer group's $457 million lawsuit against Sony over digital store monopolies. We've talked about these lawsuits extensively in some of my previous Sony coverage, and I'll link all of these videos for you down in the video description and pinned comment, but I wanted to say I truly do feel it's with these lawsuits that fans and gamers stand the best chance of carving out better rights of ownership and battling back against Sony's attempts to turn the PlayStation Store into a monopoly. Ultimately, you can community note their tweets, you can spam their trailer comment sections, and you can put together petitions with millions of signatures. Sony and the rest of these publishers simply do not care, because they feel as if they have full control of your games and you'll do whatever they say to play those games. But when it comes down to writing millions, if not billions of dollars in lawsuit settlement checks, that's where Sony will recognize the complaints and ultimately back down. But as always, that's just my take on the entire Kill Physical Games fiasco, and here's where I turn to you for your valuable feedback. How are you feeling about Sony, GTA 6 going all digital, $1,000 plus consoles, or any of the rest of what's happening right now in the games industry? Drop a comment and let's see where the community is landing on all of this. If you happen to have liked the video, please hit subscribe and ring the notifications bell to receive my future upload alerts. And before I go, I'd like to extend the warmest thanks to these hardcore channel members, for without their support, content like this would not be possible. Until the next one, this is Lieutenant Buzz Lightyear, signing off.